No, 3,600 bucks. And 2000 FY 2020 biennial budget and the property tax millage rate proposed to be levied to support the proposed budget. I call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Mr. Mays? Present. Mr. Davis?
Present.
Mr. Guerra?
Present.
Ms. Fields? Present. Ms. Winfrey Carter?
Present.
Mr. Winfrey?
Present.
Ms. Galloway?
Present.
Mr. Griggs?
Present.
Ms. Worthing?
Present.
Thank you.
We'll have our Pledge of Allegiance by Councilman Griggs. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. President, if we could have a moment of silence for Lena.
Mrs. Leela Harvey.
Miss Leela Harvey.
Mr. President, may I add all the victims of the Santa Fe shooting to that moment of silence?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Reading of the Disorderly Persons City Code subsection, and it reads, any person that persists in disrupting this meeting will be in violation of Flint City Code section 31-10, disorderly conduct, assault and battery, and disorderly persons, and will be subject to arrest for a misdemeanor. Any person who prevents the peaceful and orderly conduct of any meeting will be given one warning. If they persist in disrupting the meeting, that individual will be subject to arrest. Violators shall be removed from the meeting. Now we'll have a brief overview of the proposed budget by our Finance Director, Mr. Huey Newsom.
Thank you, Council President. I'm gonna quickly go through some slides. I think that again, for the public and also for council, we have posted copies of the budget, and also we distributed the highlights of the general fund in the press release that announced this hearing. So I'll keep it brief. But I think the main thing in terms of our general fund right now, we're projecting in this proposed budget that we're spending roughly about 50, almost 56, bringing in 56 is we're spending roughly about 59% of the general fund on public safety. I think that's very critical. A breakdown of the revenues are here in front of you. I think the one thing that comes out whenever I look at this projection going forward is that mostly revenue is driven by property taxes as well as income taxes and some state taxes that are shared, but really those revenues are relatively flat. right? And that's the reality that we're dealing with right now. We can't comfortably say that there are going to be significant increases above 1-2% in any of these line items going forward at this point. And that's the reason that we have to really focus on maintaining control over our costs. And right now, one cost that is going to continue to increase, you see the cost, the expenditures projected, or at least what we're proposing across the different departments. But underneath that is the MERS obligation that we have, our pension obligations, as we talk ad nauseum almost about legacy costs. And right now, the $24 million that you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen is what we're going to be paying next fiscal year. We're obligated to pay that. We can't negotiate that away, and that continues to go up and up based on what we've discussed with MERS at this point. Again, this is across all the funds. You see the general fund is the one that's mostly hit and has the largest impact in terms of our MERS, our obligation, which is our pension obligation. That's on this slide here in front of you. And then dollars in the following year, most of that falls into the general fund, right? I won't go too deep into the other funds right now, but I will say that for the most part, what you find is that because mostly driven by legacy costs in the in our other adopted funds, we are seeing increased costs. In some cases, we are able to offset that with increased revenues, particularly in, say, like 265, some of our smaller funds. But for the most part, for the funds that are supported by millages or by special assessments, we're keeping revenue basically flat, costs are going up. One thing I will bring out as well, these numbers are, these numbers are very similar to what you've seen in your proposed budget. They're just sliced and diced a different way. But again, we are definitely looking at ways. I know we've talked about and continue to talk about the water fund. We're again projecting that the water fund in our 5-year projections are going to go in the red, which is why we've taken some of the measures we've taken to kind of address the solvency of the water fund. I won't talk too deeply about that this evening, but I did want to kind of bring that back up in this public forum. So with that being said, I will relinquish this presentation. Hopefully that's kind of a highlight reel, if you will, of some of the things we've talked about over the last few weeks in these budget hearings. And as usual, the information is provided if you have any questions of me. Don Steele is here as well, or anybody in the finance department. We're more than happy to help and assist you all as you all look at this budget, consider this budget, and at some point officially adopt this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newsom. And that brings us to our public hearing on the FY2 2019 and 2020 operating biannual budget. Are there any speakers for this public hearing? Are there any speakers for this public hearing?
Good evening, Councilor. Mr. Mitchell. Speaking on this proposed budget, as this budget relates to the mayor's salary, from the late financial management, they cut the mayor's salary, and she working as mayor, half of her pay has been cut. So this proposed budget on land, on tax rebatement is totally not right unless you discredit down there early cutting the mayor's salary with that tax and let the mayor do her job like she should be, with not full pay, with full pay.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Are there any other public speakers for, any speakers for? This public hearing is closed. Now we'll have final follow-up remarks regarding the proposed budget by our Councilperson Eric Mays, who is the Finance Chair of the Finance Committee.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not surprised that we only had one speaker at the public hearing. And Mr. Mitchell, I can respect what you said about the mayor's or elected officials' salaries. Under the new charter, it should have been a local officers' compensation board put into place by February, 30 days after design. And so that tells me something about our priorities and our communications as it relates to the charter and so forth and so on. But that's a tall order. We'll see if we get there, Mr. Mitchell, and everybody else who's listening as it relates to coming out of an emergency manager order and orders as it relates to local officers' salary, including the councils. But the overview that Mr. Newsom gave for the public, and I see members of the public coming in now, Dr. Lee Bell, and the name is, I know who that is. Say the name. Barbara Biggs. Coming in now. The public hearing is closed on the budget, but about $56 million general fund, 55,800,000 and some thousand. We've held hearings with departments on the mayor's proposed budget. The budget process is that the mayor and her staff and everybody does a good job proposing a budget, and then it comes to council, and we have the right to look at it, accept it as presented, make amendments, and if we do make amendments, if the mayor agree with those amendments, then that's the budget. But if she objects to those amendments, she can veto the proposed budget with amendments, and then we would have to get 6 votes or more of city council to override the mayor's veto and set the budget for the upcoming 2 fiscal years. We do 2 budgets at a time. We'll do FY 18-19, and if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Newsom, we'll also do FY 19 and 20. Even though we have a 5-year financial projected plan, we'll adopt 2 budgets at a time. Tomorrow on the Finance Committee agenda, we have committee meetings tomorrow. There's a special order dealing with proposed budget amendments. I would ask each council member to go home tonight, think about any areas of the budget. For those who attended the hearings, we've heard the police chief make a request. The police chief made a request for 20 additional officers, and he said 40 vehicles. 20 additional officers and 40 vehicles. I'm taking that request as it relates to public safety very seriously. Mr. Newsom has told us that if we propose any amendments, let him and his staff look at them first and see where money might be moved around from before we go dipping into the, I'm gonna call it the $16 million or so reserve fund. That was your request, correct, Mr. Newsom? Sort of. That was his request. That's what they said. Let us look at the amendments. The clerk has asked for a possible reinstatement of the deputy clerk position, and it's something to that because now we have a time limit on the clerk's position under the new charter, 5 years. So that's something I'll seriously look at as well. the reinstatement possibly of a deputy clerk. I'll look at the staff in our office and what they do and any help or changes that they might have as well. I also look at Brennan Center and Hasselbrink Center. We funded them about $10,000 each year. And so I'll take a close look and ask my colleagues to take a close look at the Brennan and Hasselbrink Center. I've had some conversation with Ms. Jerry Winfrey Carter, and I think, if my mind serves me right, blight is a priority issue in her mind. It's a priority issue in my mind, as well as, I think, public safety. And so we've held a public hearing. I think we might have to do a better job next year of alerting the public to chime in. We did a decent job this year because it was published as the law required in the Flint Journal. Ms. Brown can correct me if I'm wrong, and also in the Courier, and it was posted, it was there. But I don't know if the public really understands that this was their day to chime in, or if the public do understand that, I believe that they've trusted us. They've trusted the mayor and this council to set these two budgets and move forward. All council members to do your homework through the night. Come prepared tomorrow to discuss proposed budget amendments that might move forward to the following Monday's council meeting. I'll get with the president and Ms. Brown, and we will decide whether we will call a special Finance Committee meeting to make these budget amendments. And if the council chooses not to make any, then Mr. Newsom, Mr. Branch, to the administration, if no amendments is made, we'll be adopting that budget, I would suspect, as proposed. But I will be proposing some budget amendments in those areas. If the administration sees anything that they need amended since they've put this budget forward, I would look forward to that conversation tomorrow and the days to come. Those would be my remarks regarding the proposed budget at this time. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Council, and thanks to the administration as well. And thanks to the public for being here, and stay tuned.
Thank you, Councilman Mays. Now we'll have council comments, and we'll start with Councilwoman Worthy.
I really don't have much to say other than really the only proposed change that I am in favor of at this time is restoring council benefits for dental and vision. That is something that we had lost with the emergency manager, and that's all.
Councilman Griggs. Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I have been looking over the budget, and I, for one, I don't know about the public, but I was under the impression myself, and that's a lack of clarity on my own part, that this was part of the council's finalization of any changes that we would like to have. We've been talking about that. And so I just wonder if myself as the council person, and I want to apologize, thought that, wonder if maybe some of the others thought it as well. I will say for the record that in looking at some of the proposed budget recommendations in this new 5-year plan, in some of the areas they are significantly larger in supplies and operating expenses than what was sent to the Treasury when we were under the emergency manager. And for that reason, I guess I can't help but wonder why, when we were submitting our budgets to the Treasury, we were more responsible for some of the expenses and supplies than it looks like we are in this current budget. And some of the ones that I'm looking at is even in the administration office, the supplies and operating expenses, and I think I shared them. And also even in the city administration. And the reason why that's key is because if we have the ability to go from, and I kept my proposal from when Mr. Sabuda provided them and they were going to the state. And if you look at some of the proposals from what we have, and I wrote some of the figures down because I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. In the administration, the supplies and operating expenses range from $48,764 to $49,745. So in some cases, they're almost doubled. Now, the wages and fringes decreased, but it also begs the differ of just because that decreases, why does the supplies increase? And if we have that kind of money available, why wouldn't we put that over into the police department? And so I'm looking forward to that conversation. And I just want this community to know that public safety and blight is very important to Councilwoman Galloway as well. Thank you.
Councilwoman Winfrey Carter.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I've also been looking at the budget and looking at ways that we can crunch some numbers to increase for public safety as well as blight, because I think that's very important, particularly in the 5th Ward. We have a severe blight problem, and I am strongly requesting that we look at public safety and blight. And that's all I have to say. And for the public, thank you for coming out.
Councilwoman Fields.
I'll reserve my comments for when council has a meeting trying to come to consensus on any changes we want to see to the final budget.
Councilman Guerra.
Yeah, I understand that this budget has really bare bones and that we need to try to keep it a little fiscally conservative. But one thing I would like to see once we start talking about it is a way to increase public safety, if that may be to get a grant writer for the public safety department to get more money for them. And I look forward to the discussions in the next council meeting.
Councilman Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have looked over the budget quite a bit and came to the consensus that the administration as well as other departments made it lean as possible and took the sacrifices necessary to try to keep the city out of going back into receivership. It's a lot of things we know we need, such as the blight and everything else, but at this time we have to make lemonade out of these lemons. And it's going to take a while for us to be able to afford to do some of the things we would like to see. But I really think this body really needs to pay attention to leadership, meaning the financial CFO, Mr. Newsom. I had a meeting even with him, and I've been in business quite a while, and it's hard when you don't have the resources to do what you want to do. It's called robbing Peter to pay Paul. We just came out of this situation, and it's a lot of things the chief would like to have, but he also understands the predicament we're in. And I really think we need to be mindful of this budget and where we stand at this time to deviate from where every department made it lean as possible, and I understood that even with the blight department, when they was here before us, said they didn't even spend all of the money that they had. So I just wish we'd be mindful, because we just now getting out the woods. We are not out the woods. We still got the water crisis. But to be mindful that we don't go backwards. And let's keep trying to move forward, but it's a sacrifice. Thank you.
Thank you, council, and thank you, public, for coming to this public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Newsom. Thank you, Finance Chair. And I'm looking forward to further discussion. I know we'll have some tomorrow. There will be committee meetings tomorrow beginning at 5 o'clock, I believe it is. Is that correct, Ms. At the time is 5 o'clock? Okay, and I know that there are some special orders in Finance Committee, so we'll be looking forward to those discussions. If nothing,
Mr. President,
Councilman Mays.
yeah, I would move that we adjourn.
Okay. Is there a second, Councilman Santino Guerra?
I'll second that.
It's been moved and second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Point of order.
Councilman Mays.
We in a special meeting out here on the floor. We never really did it, but it's really a roll call vote.
If that makes you happy,
I mean,
Would you repeat while we're doing the roll call?
yeah, because I asked for it, and because we out on the floor, all votes is roll call on the floor. That's why, according to these rules.
To adjourn the meeting, you want to roll call?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Guerra?
Yes.
Ms. Fields?
Yes.
Ms. Winfrey Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Winfrey?
Yes.
Ms. Galloway?
Yes.
Mr. Griggs? Yes. Ms. Worthing? Yes. Mr. Mays?
Yes.
The vote is 9 yes, 0 no to adjourn the meeting.
we are adjourned. Madam Vice President, I need to see.